Hello, and welcome to All the Grief, a regular podcast for all those who have been touched by grief. We are your hosts. I am Rebecca Luttrell.
And I am Andrea Mathern. We are two friends, a therapist, and a social scientist, both highly sensitive fellow grievers, here to share our hearts as we talk about all the grief. Oh my gosh, good afternoon, Rebecca.
Good afternoon, Andrea. How's your heart this afternoon?
What a good question. I mean, it's always funny because I know this is how we start, and it's just such a lovely invitation just to connect with myself for a moment. My heart right now feels joyful getting to see you at a different time. I always love that. But one of my littles started getting sick, so I can feel part of my heart with him. He's my one that spikes a fever. I mean, he's takes after me. We have big feelings. And so we tend to get sick in a big way. So he spikes a really high fever and it's just intense. And when he fell asleep on the sofa, I was like, we're in it. We are officially sick. So part of my heart is with him, and I'll probably go cuddle up with him and then be sick myself in 4 to 5 days. How is your heart this afternoon?
I think it's a mix of things. The thing that feels most clear as you're asking this, I had coffee this morning with a previous professor of mine who we just connected. I had her for a few classes and we've stayed connected over the years, and just kind of figured out recently that we actually don't live far from each other. We could take a walk if it wasn't rainy and cold this morning, but we met for coffee. And so my heart just feels really full, a little loved up, and it was sweet. It was nice to have that. So,
God, you always deserve to be loved up. I'm so glad.
Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited. Today we are talking with Jessica Maguire, and Jessica is a TEDx speaker and a nervous system educator known for demystifying the science of trauma and emotional resilience. Her courses and masterclasses have impacted over 20,000 students across the world, helping people rewire their nervous systems and heal from chronic stress and burnout. Her work integrates neuroscience, somatic practices, and real-world tools for building emotional capacity. I'm so excited to welcome Jessica to All the Grief.
Welcome.
Thank you both so much for the opportunity to speak with you. I've been a big fan of your podcast, so I'm excited to be here.
Jessica, that's so kind. We're so excited to speak with you too. How is your heart this morning for you? It is, in fact, morning for you.
That's right. Andrea, I could relate. My daughter has been sick this week, and last night, for some reason, between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., she wanted to be up and, playtime. So I've shared a little bit of her germs this week.
Right.
But also really we wrapped up one of our trainings for our students this week. And so it was a big celebration. It's a little bit like, when you hit school holidays, that feeling. We've wrapped up our official teaching for the year. So it's nice. It's been a big year. So I'm having a little bit more space, which feels really good.
Oh, I love it. Yes, that sort of victorious end of school year feeling where it's like, I did it and whatever I want to do with my time ahead of me.
Exactly.
Well, Jessica, we're so glad that you're here, and I can imagine how just winding this conversation will get. But let's start with your grief story. So we ask people about their grief origin story, that moment when grief sort of turned their world upside down. And we'd love to hear, when you think about that, what is that moment for you?
I had my own clinic and was in my life feeling very full and happy, but I decided that I'd always felt like there was a little bit of something missing in my work with how I supported people. I was looking more from a body-based perspective, but I really wanted to look at that communication between the body and brain a little bit more. So I actually decided I was going to close down my clinic and take a year to get into the research. And as you know, I'm based in Australia and I was planning to come to the US, and very unexpectedly, my older brother, Sam, ended his own life. And it was a huge shock, and we'd been very close as adults as well because we lived in similar areas, traveling in different cities across Australia, and he'd kind of followed me back where I was, coincident. So it was a huge shock to my system and obviously for my parents. And I was in this place of, well, do I still go or do I stay?
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling of it's a little bit like sometimes the bottom of the earth just falls out from under you and you don't really
Mm-hmm.
know where to be. So I spent a lot of time traveling and studying and looking at different ways, but also it was where I like to think of walking the talk because I got very dysregulated, meaning I would swing up to the highs of anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
insomnia. But then I can clearly remember being invited to parties and things and just not being able to get off the couch.
Mm-hmm.
I was pretty stoic too, I was pretty type A personality back then. I was doing triathlons, very much of, just push on and keep going. But
Yeah.
I knew that wasn't going to work anymore. And I started getting more and more into therapy as the time went on and I was ready. And what actually came to the surface that I didn't realize until I started really sifting through the layers was there was the grief that I experienced when I was 4 because lost my younger brother then.
Mm.
So he died of sudden infant death syndrome. And there's a lot of complexities that come with this, the way it changes your patterns of connection with your parents who you
Sure.
can tell are going through something. So it was a very long period of going through layers and layers, very challenging to look at what was today and what was the past.
Mm.
But it has led me to the work that I do today. Of course, I'd give anything to have Sam and my younger brother, Luke, here.
Mm-hmm.
It has led me down a trajectory that's really helping people navigate things like grief, but also all sorts of experiences through the lens of the nervous system, based on what I know professionally, but really my own experiences personally. And it really filters into a lot of what I teach now, which is mostly to coaches and clinicians on walking the talk of what we teach. It doesn't mean being perfect by any means, because we're not going to be regulated all the time, but learning to allow what comes to move through us with a good understanding of what we're experiencing. And I think grief is one of those things that there's a lot of confusion around how to grieve properly, what should happen, the expectation, which we know a lot of that is driven from the higher centers in the thinking brain. It doesn't always support us, but I am really passionate about this work and so fulfilled by it. But as I said, still miss my brothers all of the time.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Thank you for sharing. Those make so much sense. And I think not only unpacking the grief of losing Sam, which is enough, that is huge to be unpacking in your connection, but then to find this unresolved grief or unintegrated grief from being so young, from being 4 and Luke's death impacting, like you said, all of the family bonds and your own bonds with your parents. So it was just, like pulling the thread of a sweater and it's like, well, I'm already halfway through. I kind of just have to keep going. I can't wear a half unraveled sweater.
Exactly. And just not even having that in my awareness. But it was interesting the way that it was influencing my life without me having that awareness.
Totally.
And yeah, I think there's a part where it has led to a lot of the work I do today as well on what we call prediction coding, or how the brain and body make predictions of how things will be based on the past. And to look at this as healing through a contemporary neuroscience lens, I think that experience really helped me understand why people continued to respond with these profound responses after shocks and losses of people like I went through. It was an incredibly hard time, but I also think there's a lot to learn from that of how we collectively look at grief, because I think there's a lot missing in our society to support people grieving. Not to say we can be good or bad, but I think there's a lot we could do to help others who are going through loss when you've gone through that yourself and you realize what's missing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely. Can you say a little bit more about prediction coding and what that is?
Sure. It's so fascinating that we have come from a really top-down way of looking at things. It's sort of like, well, if I think differently, I'll feel better. And in some ways, we can use our thoughts and our narratives and our beliefs to change physiology and what's happening, that top-down flow of information. But then what's quite predominant when we're having a really difficult time is the information from our body coming up to our brain. So it's a lot louder and it's communicating with lower centers. So when we look at people who are experiencing, like what I was saying, I would swing up to the highs of anxiety, down to this flatness and shutdown and sense of doom, we might say that somebody has a dysregulation of their nervous system where it's not flowing smoothly with the normal ups and downs throughout the day. There's these exaggerated peaks and troughs. And if we look at why that happens, it's because our brain and body are always learning from what we go through. So those experiences that are the most emotional, we do the most learning. And that process we call neuroplasticity. So if we look at the way the brain and body update, how they have this flow of information between the brain and body, body-brain, there's certain networks in the brain that light up from the information in our body, and it's creating a prediction. So the brain predicts first and then checks to see if it's right. And that allows it to be quick, make assumptions fast, which could save our life. But the flip side of that is I continued for a long time to predict that the world was going to fall apart again.
Right.
I struggled to go into relationships in case something went wrong. I had this prediction of things are going to fall apart again. And in the time when I got down to what was happening from Luke's passing, there was a lot of predictions that I never even knew about that were influenced. It's like, I'll never have a family that is, safe and loving.
Yeah.
And I continued to prove that prediction right subconsciously. So the prediction that our brain is making in our nervous system can only change when there's a prediction error, and it will update this model. And so if we are not bringing it into conscious awareness, we almost prove it right and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it was in relationships with people where I was the fixer, the rescuer. And it wasn't until I met my now husband and had a new experience that took a lot of navigating because it was uncomfortable that model changed. And I relearnt that safety. So grief that is a big shock to our system will change our predictions so that we may detect threat more. We may feel more, of that hopelessness and shutdown and like I'm going to be alone forever. And it's really about needing to work with what's happening through our brain-body system in ways that support us. And that's not necessarily a narrative of what grief should look like or time frames, expectations we put on ourselves. It's much more experiential and working really with those sensory systems in the body that create the way we experience an emotion and having an awareness that this is even taking place as well.
I love so much of what you're saying. I was having a conversation recently about like habitual patterns and how there's a hypervigilance that you can kind of start to notice in yourself as this habit. And in the conversation, it was like the person talking about it was saying, it's like this voice that's right in front of me that's just like, be careful, be careful. And they were kind of feeling like, oh God, I'm doing this to myself. But like, as we were talking about it, it was starting to unravel that piece of how it makes sense because at some point, what you're calling a prediction coding, at some point, something happened and that part was like, I've got you, and so it has like a wisdom and it's like, I'm just going to keep reminding you to be careful and now nothing bad will ever happen again. And when we can kind of recognize it in a way that especially when we see, oh, that's no longer serving me, or it's getting in the way of something and it's creating, like you're saying, an outcome that I don't want. It's constantly making things unsafe, actually. It's doing the opposite or something. That we start to have maybe sadness because we're aware of it and we're like, oh God, it's been doing this for years and there's so much I missed. But then also we can start creating more space. And I love what you're naming, which I always call like a corrective emotional experience. It's like that we can have these other experiences that are like, oh, it's not true. that I have to hold tight to safety. For maybe I can't keep myself safe, and I can start to have a new relationship to that that's not me thinking I'm in control of that. Yeah, I love everything that you're saying there.
It's a really useful way for people to make sense of that. And I think it's great when we can see it happening. But I think for a lot of the time when we're having a difficult period, there's no space. Like we're just in that story.
Right. Totally.
Giving people an understanding that some of that narrative is arising because of the state they're in of their nervous system. You know, the predictions of mobilization are going to be hypervigilance. I've got to guard, I've got to watch out, something terrible is going to happen. But it's also the prediction of mobilization. You know, the heart speeds up, the body goes tight. And I think once people say, here's that mobilization of my nervous system and here's the story and the space is there, they can start to have a different experience, but create a new prediction. We have had neuroplasticity coming into the conversation, you know, when it comes to this kind of work. But I think a lot of that people think more like habit formation. But what we're saying here is, you know, it's neuroplasticity that gets you into dysregulation, but it's also neuroplasticity that will get you out of it. So it can be really helpful for people to understand that it's a transient thing. And, you know, also not their fault. Like this is the brain and the body and the nervous system.
That was the point I was thinking of too, Jessica, of sometimes it's like, what is wrong with me that I attract this kind of person? Or what is wrong with me that I keep getting into this kind of work environment, or whatever it is that is the pattern. And I think building this understanding of how it was like our brain coming to the rescue, maybe not understanding what might actually help us, but the way you were both talking about it is sort of our brain trying to predict and keep us safe, but it's our own autonomy that can actually get us out of it. Like it's like owning the new narrative, like breaking that pattern and owning it and saying like, okay, here's the new cycle between the brain and the heart, the brain and the body. So you're going through this, just like you said, peeling away layer after layer of understanding grief and how these patterns have sort of impacted your own decision making. And how did that kind of lead you? I mean, coming out of that, building your own, new neural pathways, and then kind of finding yourself continuing on this path to then help others.
Yeah, so I'd worked for a good decade as a clinician. So it was always in my nature to help people. And when I came back to Australia, I put together some workshops for my own patients. So typically I was referred from doctors, patients who had a lot of chronic health issues. So they tried everything that was, for acute management, hadn't figured out what was going on, weren't really getting anywhere. And it was always a challenge, but I enjoy that, nutting it out piece. So I came back, and to support my clients, it was like, well, there's a lot of this I could give them to do themselves, and particularly around the neuroeducation. So, what we just explained about neuroplasticity, getting us in, getting us out, those concepts of neuroeducation, when they're taught well, they do lead to top-down regulation. They regulate the nervous system. I started off with a small workshop, and it sold out really quick. And then my husband and I started taking them around Australia. People were really, really looking for a better way of understanding their experience. And then my husband said, you need to do this online so more people can find it. And of course, I was like, it won't work online. No one will sign up. No, that whole thing. I can't do it that way. I was a little bit old school and I value connection so much.
Totally. Yeah.
It felt a bit distant.
Yeah.
But we did the first masterclass. It was a 3-hour masterclass online, and it was so well received that there was requests for, well, can you do a program? And then it took me about 6 months to put that together. And so then in 2020, we started our 8-week vagus nerve program, which this week I actually retired. So it is now finished up. it was built on the foundations of neuroplasticity because it was an 8-week program giving people everything they needed to do themselves. And 8 weeks is about the gold standard for creating neuroplastic change. And then last year, we began our certification course for coaches and clinicians and practitioners. And that's all I do now. That's where I believe I have the most impact, and mentoring other coaches and clinicians. And we're coming back to connection again, which is interesting. It's gone full circle. So I do love the online delivery, but I've always missed that in-person connection. So next year we are going to have a 7-day version of our certification course, Amiga Institute. So to bring that back, because I really miss that way of, connecting in the real world. So it took a while to piece it together, but it is my passion to teach. It always has been. And I do love making complex science really applicable. So I've been to so many conferences where I learned, like the first time I learned about prediction coding, I was like, this is amazing. And then I was like, how do I do this? Because it was the world of academia can be so removed from what we're doing with our clients. So I love to make it that people can implement it themselves or with their clients. And I think that is where the autonomy of this work lies, that yes, we still want health professionals when it's needed, but we can also do a lot of this on our own as well.
Yeah. So I'm realizing we haven't explained quite what top-down is. And in case some people are like, what does that even mean? Because sometimes when you speak a common language, it's like, I know what you mean, but kind of going from mental concepts, mental ideas, thinking, and using that to create change in our feelings. Kind of, you did name it a little bit in the beginning, like having that, I realize if I have a different thought, I'll feel differently. And so you're working top down, and then sort of bottom up is more whenever you move into the somatic experience and feel what's happening, and that starts to shift and it changes the way we're thinking about it or the way we're kind of conceptualizing it. Feels like a basic way that I might explain that. And so I'm curious because I did hear you say like there's a way that in your work that you're kind of doing top down. So how does that happen in the work that you are doing or that you're training clinicians to do and for people to do themselves?
Yeah, sure. Great explanation, by the way. So if we go back to that concept of prediction coding, the most part of how the brain predicts or makes a output is based on, first of all, the sensations that we're experiencing, largely interoception, which is our 8th sensory system. And this is sensations that can be bodily states like hunger, thirst, needing to go to the bathroom, or it can be sensations to do with, like my chest feels tight and my palms are sweaty, which could relate to anxiety. But it's then the emotion isn't constructed until it reaches the brain, and the way we appraise that creates the emotion. So we used to think like, an emotion is in one little part of the brain, but physical pain and emotions are actually a whole brain experience. So what we know is for people who have anxiety, it's like the volume on sensations is turned up too loud, and they immediately appraise that sensation with a threat. Oh no, something really bad's going to happen. This is not good. Oh, my heart's racing. And they feel overwhelmed, like their sensations feel too big. For people with depression, it's the opposite. So it's like the volume's too quiet and they can't hear the sound properly, which then makes it really hard for them to self-regulate because they can't hear these messages. They don't know how to use that information. And for some people who are dissociated, there's no sound at all. And that can be neurodivergent individuals as well. But if we're looking at how people appraise sensations, there can be the primary threat. So let's say it's like that tightness in the chest, the heart racing, and it's like, I'm anxious. What tends to happen for people who are spending a long time in that state of, anxiety, or what we might say hyper arousal, where there's too much energy in their nervous system, is they have a secondary threat appraisal of that. So it's like, here's the initial actual sensation. There's anxiety. But the secondary threat appraisal could be, oh God, my heart's going so fast. There's definitely something wrong with me. Or like what we just said, why am I like this? It can be the shame and the blame. Now, once we teach somebody about the different states of the nervous system, essentially we can reduce the secondary threat appraisal. And that means, yes, there can be that, okay, I'm noticing the anxiety, I'm feeling the tension, I notice my automatic reaction, but it doesn't go on for as long. So it's not to say nobody ever feels pain or has these ups and downs in emotions, but through dysregulation, the way that it's labeled constructs the emotion. The way that it's appraised is making that emotion bigger and it's lasting longer. So the best understanding can be the 3 primary states of the nervous system, which is to recognize there's regulation, which is like a bandwidth in the middle. And then we could have too much mobilization, which we've just spoke about as more of a hyper arousal. And that can lead to those feelings and sensations like a racing heart, tightness in the shoulders and the rest of the body. The belly might feel tight as well. And there can be the urgency, like I've got to go faster. I've got to do more. What's wrong? I've got to keep a lookout or something's going to fall apart. We kind of touched on this a little bit before. But for a lot of people who have had traumatic stress, they can move down into an immobilizing response where there's not enough energy. So it's a little bit like pulling a handbrake on in a car. And this is where education's really important, because if people are finding themselves stuck, like I said, I couldn't get off the couch that day when I was invited to a party, and I was like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I just get myself together? My brother's passed away over a year ago. I should have blah, 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 that story. So if I'd known that that was immobilization, that would have completely changed the way that I related it to myself, and I would have come out of it sooner. So education where we really understand, not just in a cognitive way, but we relate to sensations in a new way, our interoceptive experience changes, that is really the essence of where we need to begin so that people can say, okay, this is what is happening. Some people say it's like taking out the second arrow. We shoot our first arrow that we get shot with, which is our difficult experience. And then we shoot ourselves again for having the difficult experience. So we're trying to take out that second arrow through education. And that first is really important. And, for coaches and clinicians, if you can explain to your clients this bandwidth of regulation changes day to day, sometimes it's narrow and we can't let a lot of our life in. Like we have to then say, okay, I can't do a lot today. But sometimes it's wide. And the more we work with our nervous system over time, it does become wider. But a major loss or a tragedy will shrink that. As a culture, we talk a lot about fight or flight, and we praise people who fight, and we understand why people run away, but we don't talk about why people might freeze, collapse, shut down. So, a lot of people don't know about that happening. And there's also the blaming that we hear with that. Like, well, why didn't they stand up for themselves? Or why didn't they do something? Or why didn't they say something? I think that understanding is incredibly important before anything happens. But often people reach for resources like, well, if I just change my breathing, I'll feel better. Unless we're matching those resources to the state we're in through the principles of neuroplasticity, they won't be as effective. So it starts with this strong foundation of like, what am I experiencing?
I mean, this is, you can't help but like think about yourself and think about like the times when you've experienced either that sort of like hypersensation or, that sort of like, I don't know, almost like feels like a dead zone, that sort of really quiet silence, shut down. Yeah. And both, both can feel unnerving, if you're not sort of used to sort of handling or recognizing those within your systems. So as you're working with clinicians and other support folks, and you're thinking about, this experience of grief and these messages that we hear. And I never heard that thing about the second arrow, but then how we sort of attack ourselves because we're not behaving the way we should. How does that sort of manifest in things that are even less talked about? Because you work with people around burnout as well. And so I'm curious sort of how that looks as people sort of come in. I feel like I don't even know that people necessarily know they're burnt out until they're like crispy. So I'm just curious, sort of what's the experience of working with that?
It's a great point around burnout, because that immobilization response, we could say, is looking at an acute stressor. Like in the moment, some people collapse, they freeze, they shut down. But we can also look at it for prolonged stress. So, my dad was a dairy farmer and my parents didn't have much money, but our hot water used to run out all the time. So if you were the last person to have the shower, you're going to have a cold one. And I think about this with burnout. It's a little bit like, imagine that regulation piece is that middle band that we were talking about is like warm water and the right temperature for your bath. But if we're facing things like grief, we tend to have an increase in our mobilizing energy. So it's a little bit like the bath. We turn all the hot water on and the bath gets too hot, but it's because we're having huge sensory experiences. It's trying to create an understanding of our world without somebody in it, like so many pieces to it. And then let's say if you're like what I used to be like initially, where I didn't necessarily want to sit still with what was there. So I was like, oh, we'll just plan the next thing. We'll just do the next thing. Come on, let's find something else to distract. And then it wouldn't be until I hit like a wall and collapsed because I'd been running on high, not sleeping. It's almost like a protective layer over the top of this mobilization so that you don't have to go down into sitting with what's there. But the hot water runs out. And that's what happens essentially with burnout is we've spent so long in that hyper arousal state that then we run out of that and then we come down into this cold state. So, and I agree, I don't think people know because the precursor to it is being in that state of mobilization for prolonged periods without that ever turning off. And, if I think about when Sam died, the worry I had for my parents and the worry to go and like packing up my old life, like it was huge things to deal with on top of that. And then I was alone a lot of the time while traveling, which it probably wasn't the smartest thing to do because there were moments where I hit like real rock bottoms from not having enough people. And I remember being in France and no one would speak to me because, they weren't often speak English when you're in France. And I just came back to the hotel I was staying at and sobbed and sobbed and sobbed on the bed. But then I was like, okay, I'm going to Google grief retreat. So I Googled grief retreat and I actually found a grief retreat in Boulder, Colorado. So for 7 days I went on a grief retreat, which sounds so morbid, but all I wanted to do was be with people, not necessarily talking about what had happened, but just to feel a feeling of belonging.
Yeah.
I say this because people in that burnout state of immobilization will often stonewall, isolate, withdraw, cut off other people. And I can understand in a way why, because you feel that you owe everybody an explanation of how you are. And so the great side for me traveling was I was a stranger, but after doing that 7 days retreat, and I'm not going to say I was fixed afterwards because there was still months and months of layers of grief, but I did end up sharing a room with this beautiful woman who we never spoke to each other at the end, but it turned out she'd also lost her brother who died by suicide. And she invited me to go and stay with their family after the retreat had ended. And it became the most, therapeutic thing to have somebody else who understood that
Mhm.
experience.
Yeah.
So I think the part around the burnout, the cutting off, the isolating, it's all a pattern. And being able to understand those states and navigate it without the extremes
Yeah.
doesn't
Mhm.
mean that we don't feel sad. It doesn't mean that we don't have hard days, but it brings us back a little bit more to a less swinging up, swinging down. And through a lot of, I think, support of other people who can sit with us, it really does allow that process to move through us. And I
Mm.
think a lot of the things that we see with burnout is probably like what I was saying. I was resisting the grief. I didn't want to do it. It was like, no, I just want to get to the next thing and it will be better there. I
Right.
didn't want to do
Mhm.
the actual steps of experiencing the loss.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, listening to you, it's like we also culturally sort of reward more the hyper state, like the just push it down, get it done, the even just like intensive worrying isn't like even that odd in our culture, like, because we're always planning and sort of thinking ahead and trying to imagine every scenario and what could happen, what's plan A, B, C, D, and so there's almost like a cultural rewarding for that hyper state. And in contrast, there is this sort of like cultural shaming for the other side. So it's like, well, we don't even want, because what if we go all the way down there and then I'm not just feels I don't want to feel, but now I also look lazy or nobody wants to be around me because who wants to be around someone who's gloomy or whatever it is, but this sort of like shamefulness of not even wanting to be in this place. So I'm just thinking about it like in the cultural lens of it, there's even more acceptability for having one extreme over the other.
Mhm.
Yeah, totally. And especially if we bring in like a linear way that grief has
Right.
been shared, like through the 5 stages of grief
Mhm.
and the timelines that people put on it, like that created so much shame for me that,
Mm.
it was Sam's birthday 2 years after he died. And I was like, I should be over this by now. And then it gets pathologized if
Yeah.
you,
Mhm.
for longer than a year. I was like,
Yeah.
Mhm.
so this is complicated grief because I'm still having a difficult time. And I think, there were layers for me because I was grieving the loss of my younger brother too. But
Yeah.
I think if I'd taken away those thinking brain judgments and labels and expectations and timelines,
Mm.
Mhm.
just being kinder to what I was really meeting in the moment, I would have suffered so much less. Like
Mm.
I
Mhm.
create additional suffering to what was there because I didn't have a way to let it move through me. And
Mm.
that's why I love nervous system work because, it's like a tsunami at the start and then it's like there's space between the waves.
Mhm.
And then the wave could be 12 months later, still the same intensity.
Right.
And over time, what I learned to do, and I still do, is say,
Mhm.
okay, it's not surrender, but I can allow a meeting what's there without
Mhm.
a timeline expectation, without a judgment from the thinking brain. And that's what I was saying with that secondary threat appraisal. If
Mhm.
we have these labels that come culturally from how we don't understand grief, that makes people suffer more. It's like saying to a woman who's in childbirth, can you mindset your way to feel different? Like grief is primal.
Yeah, for sure.
I love that. And I love what you're describing. I'm actually like, oh, there's a way that those waves, so like a lot of work in a way that I've heard it is, learning to sort of surf the waves. But you have to learn that there's like a brilliance to it or that there will actually be a relief at the other side. So I think sometimes we get so like, oh, this is discomfort and I don't like discomfort and I'm not willing to feel that and kind of you can learn. And so I was like, oh, the prediction error that we hold about the wave.
Mm.
If I let myself feel the sadness, I will never not be sad again. I'm going to drown. That we have these beliefs that I think do also get reinforced societally around don't get stuck there. Why are you still sad? All these sort of stories. So it creates that prediction coding of things we haven't even experienced that we sort of feel like that might happen because everybody seems to be so afraid of it. So I don't want to go there. And that it's like that piece of education with clients of, I know it feels like you're never going to stop crying. There's so much that needs to be released in your body. Start letting yourself cry. It might get really big before it gets manageable again. But I promise you, like and I'll always say, you can be like, God, I hate Rebecca. She made me cry so much more than I meant to. Beautiful. I will hold that. I will let you hate me. But I promise you that there's a point you'll realize that doesn't last forever. And I'm really glad I let that move through my system because trying to hold that back was hurting. So it's like that prediction error and our grief that we're like, I can't let myself feel. I'm going to stay busy. And then you can kind of, I think in that riding the waves, you start recognizing the prediction error. It actually isn't forever unmanageable. It has an intensity and then it comes down and I can get back. And I call that zone, I didn't name it, but the zone of social engagement, I've heard it called that. And that way that like when we're socially engaged, it has a life to it. It has an energy. It goes up, it goes down, but it's just like not where we're like fear, 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 fear. And we can't relate or like, it's so low that we're like, what? I didn't hear anything you said. It's something where it has more energy.
Yes. So relate to many parts of what you just said. And I think that is really where we do resist because there is a fear that will be stuck there. And I think that's where that layer of anxiety can sit on top of I'm not going to go in there. I'm going to stay busy so I don't have to get down in there and I'll never come out. And I think that's a really helpful piece of education to give to somebody is, yes, it can be hard when you feel stuck down in that state and alone. That is part of what the state brings is a feeling, like people say, it feels like I'm in a dark room all by myself. But each time that somebody learns to return back to how you beautifully just explained as that zone of social engagement or into a window of regulation, that is updating the prediction code. I think about who I was prior to Sam's death and the people that I've seen come through really difficult experiences, that the process of coming back again and again actually widens that band wider than possibly what it was before. Person went through that experience, and that is not to sugarcoat or bypass anybody's experience, but essentially we are showing our nervous system, because we can't tell it, it doesn't necessarily respond to language, but we can show it that when these really hard times hit, and yes, it can floor us and it's very painful, but we also can meet that pain and learn to let it move. And I think this is where an understanding of grief is, it turns into dysregulation when it doesn't get to move. So it needs to move through our body. When we cry, our diaphragm shakes, and our face expresses that. We move in certain ways, but if we don't get to do that, that's where it remains, where it's got nowhere to go. So I think a part of that is that connection to the body, and also the education piece for how we are appraising what's happening in our experience as well.
Yeah, I feel like I probably said this on our podcast in the past, but it can never be said enough that shoulds are a threat to the nervous system. And so when we're in the I should or shouldn't, feel this or I should be this way, this is the right way, it creates suffering. It is that second arrow. It has that feel to it. And when we can, like you're saying, that top-down piece that's like, oh, it makes sense that this is happening. The anxiety as an intelligence, it's trying to protect you. And then we can relax the should or shouldn't of it and just be with, of course I feel anxious. Let me let that shake. Let me let those tears fall. And then it can move into something else. It's sort of a beautiful way of using the mind, but not in the way of language being like, stop. Why are you anxious? Nothing's happening. Stop it. Then it's a should. And using language to say, oh, this makes sense. This has a logic. This is a thing that's happening. So then we can relate to it from a different place and then allow something different to happen. Yeah, I
Yeah,
really
that's a
love that.
beautiful way to put it. I love what you said about the should is a threat to the nervous system. I haven't heard that before, and I think it's a
Mhm.
really lovely way to explain it. And a lot of that comes from time-based expectations, which if we
Mhm.
understand the part of the brain being activated in the lower centers, we don't have neural networks there for time. So, it doesn't know that it was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 10 years ago.
Right.
And I think what keeps it stuck is we expect grief to be neat, linear, and done. And
Mhm.
I think that's a lot of the time when you were able to go through what happens, like you just explained with here's the anxiety, it moves to something else. And then we might go down into immobilization and have a lot of tears and
Mhm.
that moves to something else. But it's when we are back in that bandwidth of social engagement or regulation that we can actually reconnect with love for
Mhm.
that's no longer there. And, I still now feel Sam's love and it influences my life in such beautiful ways.
Mm.
And I miss him, but it's not anymore coupled with this sense of doom that something's going
Mhm.
to happen. And I think that's the difference between, saying, well, someone's not here and I miss them and I still love them, as opposed to it's completely hijacking my experience.
Right.
Mhm.
That's where I think the nervous system is a really supportive framework for people who are grieving. And, I lost my grandmother 3 years ago and we had such a great relationship. She was 92 when she passed away.
Mm.
And I didn't have sadness, which, it can be a real surprise. But I think I almost went, should I be like sadder? But she was ready to die. I
Mhm.
was a 40-year-old woman that still had a grandmother. I mean, how amazing is that? But
Totally right.
I think there's also a piece around we don't know what experience we're going to have when we lose somebody, the
Mhm.
way our nervous system might respond. If we don't have that top-down judgment of how it should be, it just lets it be how it is and we connect back to the love for that person and feel them still around us in a way that can remind us that we belong. And
Mhm.
Yeah.
I love what you're saying, and the piece that feels like such an important takeaway in this conversation is that there isn't really a right way to go through grief or a way that it should look. This was such a beautiful reminder to me. There are pieces of a friend's grief right now that feel really complicated, and it just is the way that it is right now. It's sort of the doorway into acceptance where I'm like, why am I not crying as much as I feel like? And there isn't the logic of like, oh, and they were at the end of their life and I feel peace. It's like, it feels strange to me that I'm not crying. But this felt like this beautiful just reminder of like, it is being how it's being. And this also can be grief, and I'm not doing it wrong. So
Mm.
thank you for that.
I'm glad that it helped.
Well, thank you, Jessica. It's been a beautiful conversation.
And I feel like this is just like a closing comment. Like, I feel like so much of what you're saying has put into a structural framework, which I love. So much of what our guests have talked about, their experience from every level of sort of, we have the type A grievers who are like, well, I just knew I had to, and this isn't just like a judgment. This was like what they thought was survival. Like, I just knew I had to open up a survivors center a week after this huge grief incident, or I just wouldn't make it through. I would have just collapsed and I would have never moved again. And so it's just like, gosh, like being a type A person, I was like, I get it.
I know. I'm like,
Rebecca's my slow down
take a nap.
person. Take a nap. Have you had a bath lately? I'm
Slow
like,
down.
So it's just lovely. Like, it's so helpful to hear this framework and think about, I think, really just like reiterating that bandwidth. And we spoke with someone about our nervous system regulation during the holidays and remembering like that bandwidth does not mean we're just like fucking zenned out, all the time, like perfectly calm. It's just that you're driving. Like, it's not like you're in a car and you're like, this car is driving itself, or like, I can't even put my hands on the wheel. It's just like you're actually driving, whether you're driving through anger or you're driving through sadness or you're driving through joy, you're sort of at the wheel. So it's been so helpful. So thank you so much, Jessica.
Oh, thank you both so much for having me. I've really enjoyed this conversation and learnt a lot from you both as well. So
Thank you.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you. Andrea, I'm going to start with you. How have you been engaging with your grief this week?
Yeah, this week has been like a really grief active week, and not even necessarily like it's just been kind of like engaging purposefully. So Andrea Gibson's documentary came out and we held a watch party, and it was just beautiful to like be with people and experiencing something that had this sort of which world am I in? Like the last time I saw this, we were like at Sundance and it was like so different. And now here we are. And, you know, so much is the same and so much has changed. And it was just a beautiful reminder, I think, of like change, like even change can have grief to it, whether or not there's like a big loss around it. Just change can have some grief. And then last night, one of our podcast guests who we have just come to love holds these community nights and had a Friendsgiving last night with combined with sort of a dead dinner, she calls them, because after her father died, she spent Thanksgiving alone for the first 2 years and would cook for herself and her dad. And she would sit and have a meal. And so we all came together and we built an altar and we honored the people that we were there to honor. It was just the most beautiful, wonderful, quirky group of people. I was like, I don't know how I found myself in this room, but I'm like, I couldn't be happier to be anywhere, even though we're all like, grabbing tissues and crying and being like, me too. Yeah, I have that grief. So it's been like just a fully engaged grief week.
That's beautiful. Thank you. How about you, Jessica?
So I mentioned to Andrea that my family and I are moving to the States at the end of January. And so we are in this one foot in Australia, 1 foot in the US transition phase. But as I mentioned, there are things wrapping up here, like finishing an old program. You know, I feel like it's not just our family moving, it's like what I created off the back of my brother passing away. It's going into a new stage and I'm stepping into research. So it's very exciting what's ahead, but it's a transition period right now. You know, there is a grief that I have because I love where we live. I love our home. I love our friends. And it's a lot to say goodbye to as well. And I didn't realize till we just had this conversation that I'd been pushing it down and going, you'll be right. Just come on. We're getting over to the US. See, it's that pattern again, isn't it? If I'm honest, I can sense there's a sadness of saying goodbye to what's here and these few years that have come off the back of my brother's passing. So it's a great reminder to meet what's there. And might be a good chance this weekend to do that.
Beautiful. Oh, thank you, Jessica. Yeah, it's so huge. So thank you for your vulnerability in that share. Rebecca, how have you been engaging with your grief this week?
It's been interesting. I'm on the opposite end of the moving. So my sister is moving to Sweden. I'm the one not moving. And she currently, I live in Colorado. She lives in Washington. It's not like we're hanging out at each other's houses weekly or anything. It's just that there's like an ease to see her that I at least think yearly, like, oh, I want to make a quick trip to Washington and go hang out there. And I love their house. I love being there. It's the magical, just like lush green of the Northwest. And so she told us with a lot of enthusiasm, they've been talking about it. And I think I just lived in this realm of like, that's cute, but you're not really going to move. It's so hard to move, and they're doing it. And my mom even, I know my mom's laughing at me because she was like, they're trying to move to Sweden. I was like, yeah, whatever. That doesn't just happen. You don't just get to move to other countries. So it's happening. And I was like, I'm sad. And it's such an interesting thing because my default is usually, I'm so happy for you. I know this is a thing that you want and I'm so happy for you. And I was like, I just feel sad. And I think I'm happy for her, but I just know that I'm like so sad for me. So I don't care if I'm happy for her right now. And I'm just letting myself feel what I feel, which is, she's of course like, you can come to Sweden and then it's in the EU and you can visit. And I was like, am I going to come to Sweden? I don't know. And so right now I just want to be sad and feel that because, we are really connected, even though we don't live super close to each other. And there's something that I can feel like the heartstrings feeling further away just feels like, I know we're still connected. You're like a lot of time zones away now. So it's just that. I'm going to let myself be sad. And even when my mom's like, no, but it's so exciting. I'm like, shush, I'm sad. Let me be sad. Just let me be sad.
We're turning off those judgments. I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much, Jessica. We wish you a logistically easeful move and tender-hearted goodbyes to your community and your home and your friends, and a warm welcome when you reach San Diego. It's been such a pleasure, and we can't wait to hear what you keep doing.
Thank you both so much. It's lovely to get to have these rich conversations on these topics, especially from people who have gone through a similar experience.
Beautiful. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this episode of All the Grief. You can find us on Instagram at allthegriefpod. And please take a moment to rate our podcast and share us with your friends. We'd love to keep expanding our reach to all the people who could benefit from conversations on grief. Take care.